I was 24, fresh out of a brutal breakup, and staring down the barrel of a student loan balance that looked more like a phone number than a debt. So, when I found the listing on a niche job board for remote estate management, I didn't ask questions. I didn't ask why the pay was triple the industry standard. I didn't ask why the interview was conducted entirely via text-to-speech email correspondence. I just saw the number, saw the location, a place called Echo Ridge, about 40 miles from the nearest gas station, and signed the NDA. The job was simple. House sit a luxury property for 30 days while the owners, the Vances, were in Europe. Keep the pipes from freezing, feed the koi fish in the indoor pond, and ensure the security system remained online. Easy, right? I arrived at the property around 4 p.m. on a Tuesday in November. The sun was already dipping behind the tree line, casting long, bruising shadows across the gravel driveway. The house itself was aggressive. That's the only way to describe it. It was a jagged collection of concrete and glass jutting out of the mountainside. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a villain's lair from a Bond movie. The most striking feature was the glass. The entire rear wall of the house, facing the dense pine forest, was floor-to-ceiling glass. It was breathtaking during the day, like living inside a nature documentary. But as I grabbed the key from the lockbox and stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The air inside was sterile, smelling faintly of ozone and lemon polish. It was too clean. It felt less like a living space and more like a waiting room. I spent the first few hours unpacking and exploring. The place was massive, 3 floors, an open-concept living area, and a basement that the house guide on the kitchen counter labeled as storage, do not access. I respected that. I wasn't there to snoop. I was there to code on my laptop, drink the expensive wine they said I could help myself to, and get paid. By 7 p.m., the sun was gone, and that's when I realized the fatal flaw of the architecture. When it's dark outside and you have the lights on inside a glass house, the windows turn into black mirrors. You can't see out. You can't see the trees or the driveway or the mountains. All you can see is your own reflection staring back at you against a backdrop of absolute pitch-black void. But the catch is anyone standing in the woods could see you perfectly. They could see what you're reading, what you're watching on TV, and exactly which room you're walking into. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched. I told myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on a city kid. I made a sandwich, opened my laptop, and sat at the kitchen island, which faced that massive wall of black glass. I was about an hour into my work, typing away, when the house spoke. It wasn't a ghost whisper or anything supernatural. It was the automated smart home system, a female, robotic voice that echoed from unseen speakers in the ceiling. Good evening, user 1. External perimeter lights have been disabled per night mode protocol. I froze. The instructions the Vances left specifically said the system was automated, but hearing it cut through the silence made my skin crawl. I checked the manual they'd left. Sure enough, night mode was a power-saving feature. Okay, I muttered to myself, the sound of my own voice feeling small in the cavernous room. Just a robot, relax. I went back to typing. 10 minutes passed. The silence of the house was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Then the voice spoke again, louder this time. Alert! Rear deck door is ajar. My stomach dropped. I looked up at the wall of glass. My own reflection stared back, pale and wide-eyed. The rear deck door was directly in front of me, part of the glass wall. I squinted, trying to see past my reflection. The handle was turned. The heavy, sliding door was cracked open about 2 inches, letting a sliver of freezing mountain air whistle into the warmth of the living room. I hadn't opened that door. I hadn't even gone near it since I arrived. I sat there, frozen, waiting for the wind to blow it open further or for a raccoon to scurry in, but nothing moved. Just the black gap in the glass and the cold air pouring in. I stood up slowly, grabbing a heavy flashlight from my bag. I walked toward the glass, my heart hammering against my ribs. I reached out to slide the door shut, but just as my fingers touched the cold metal of the handle, I saw something in the glass. Not my reflection. In the black mirror of the window, just over my left shoulder, there was a smudge, a condensation print on the outside of the glass. It was the shape of a forehead and two hands pressed against the window, as if someone had been standing there just seconds ago, cupping their hands around their eyes to look inside, right at where I had been sitting. I stood there for what felt like an hour, but it couldn't have been more than 10 seconds. My breath hitched in my throat as I stared at the smudge on the glass. It was fading. That was the detail that made my knees feel like water. If that handprint had been there from the owners or the cleaners or even from earlier in the day, the condensation from the freezing night air wouldn't have clung to it like that. The print was fading because the heat that created it, the body heat of a living, breathing person, had just left the glass. I slammed the sliding door shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent house. I fumbled with the latch, my fingers shaking so bad I could barely grip the metal until I heard the satisfying thud click of the deadbolt sliding home. Then I engaged the secondary footlock at the bottom of the frame. I backed away, keeping my flashlight trained on the darkness outside. The beam just reflected off the glass, bouncing back into my eyes. I was blinding myself. "Hello?" I yelled out. My voice cracked, embarrassing and small. "I've called the police. They're on their way." It was a lie, obviously. I hadn't even pulled my phone out. I just wanted to see if anyone would flinch in the bushes. Nothing. Just the oppressive stillness of the forest and that damn reflection of my own terrified face staring back at me. I needed to secure the perimeter. That was the only thought looping in my brain. Secure the perimeter. I ran to the wall-mounted iPad in the kitchen, the brain of the house. The screen was glowing with a soft blue light, displaying the time and the internal temperature. I tapped the security icon. Status, armed, stay mode. Perimeter, secure. Cameras, offline. What? I hissed. I tapped the camera icon again. Error, cameras disabled by admin user. I cursed under my breath. The Vances had mentioned they were privacy freaks. They probably disabled the internal cameras so I wouldn't feel watched, but they must have shut off the external ones too. I felt blind. I had this fortress of technology, and it was giving me absolutely zero information. I spent the next 20 minutes doing a manic sweep of the ground floor. I checked every window latch, every door handle. The house was enormous, and every shadow looked like a crouching figure. The worst part was the acoustic design. The place was all hard surfaces, concrete floors, glass walls, marble counters. My footsteps echoed loudly, making it impossible to hear if anyone else was moving around. Every time I stopped to listen, the silence was ringing in my ears. I finally ended up back in the kitchen, staring at that sliding door. The smudge was gone now, evaporated back into the cold night. Had I imagined it? I started to gaslight myself. That's what you do when you're scared and alone. You try to build a logic that allows you to sleep. Maybe it wasn't a handprint. Maybe it was just a smear of grease from the track that caught the condensation strangely. Maybe the door wasn't ajar. Maybe the latch hadn't caught properly when the owners left and the wind just finally nudged it open. I pulled out my phone to call the Vances, just to ask about the cameras. I dialed the number they left on the fridge. Call failed. I looked at the bars. One bar of signal flickering to 0. "Come on," I muttered, wandering around the kitchen, holding the phone up like a frantic Statue of Liberty. I moved toward the glass wall. The signal was usually better near windows, but my body physically recoiled. I didn't want to get close to that glass again. I settled for a text. "Hey, everything is fine, but the back door was unlocked. Also, the cameras seem to be down. Just checking in. Mark." The message stuck on sending for a solid minute before finally swooshing away. I decided I needed noise. The silence was letting my imagination run wild. I asked the house system to play some music, something neutral, like jazz. Soft saxophone filled the room, and I felt my shoulders drop about an inch. I grabbed a knife from the butcher block, a heavy German steel chef's knife, and carried it with me to the living room couch. I wasn't going to sleep upstairs. The master bedroom was on the second floor, and the idea of being that far away from the main exits terrified me. I'd sleep on the couch, facing the glass, with the knife on the coffee table. I opened my laptop again, trying to force myself back into the code. Normalcy, I told myself. Force normalcy. I worked for about 30 minutes, the jazz music acting as a shield against the quiet. I was almost starting to feel ridiculous for my panic. Almost. Then the music cut out. It didn't fade out. It stopped abruptly mid-note. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I sat up, grabbing the knife instinctively. "System?" I asked. "Resume music." Nothing. "System!" The robotic female voice chimed in, but it sounded different this time. The cadence was off. "Priority override initiated by master bedroom control panel. Microphone active." My blood turned to ice. The master bedroom was upstairs. I was downstairs. "System," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Is there someone in the master bedroom?" "Occupancy sensors detect one individual in living room zone, one individual in master suite zone." I looked up at the ceiling, toward the second floor. The house was open concept, but the upstairs landing was shrouded in shadow. "Would you like me to enable the intercom to the master bedroom?" the system asked politely. I didn't answer. I couldn't move. I just stared up at the dark railing of the second-floor balcony, realizing with a sickening jolt that the jazz music hadn't just stopped. Someone upstairs had turned it off because they were trying to listen to me. For a moment, I tried to convince myself the sensors were faulty. Smart homes glitch all the time, right? Maybe a large moth triggered the motion detector. Maybe the heating system created a thermal pocket that the infrared camera mistook for a body. I ran through every rationalization I could think of, my grip on the handle of the chef's knife turning my knuckles white. "System," I whispered, barely exhaling the words. "Confirm occupancy. Is the individual moving?" The blue ring of light on the wall-mounted iPad pulsed slowly. "Affirmative. Occupancy sensor indicates movement in the master walk-in closet." The closet! Someone wasn't just in the room, they were rummaging through the owner's things. My fight or flight response finally kicked the flight gear into overdrive. I didn't care about the job, the NDA, or the money anymore. I needed to get out of this glass cage. I didn't bother grabbing my laptop. I shoved my phone into my pocket, kept a tight grip on the knife, and moved toward the front door, the heavy timber one, not the glass slider at the back. I moved in socks, sliding my feet carefully to avoid squeaking on the polished concrete floors. I kept my eyes glued to the dark void of the upstairs landing, waiting for a shape to detach itself from the shadows. The house was dead silent again, but now the silence felt predatory. I reached the front foyer. The front door was a massive slab of oak with a sleek black digital keypad instead of a traditional keyhole. I reached for the interior handle, expecting it to turn. It was rigid, locked. Okay, just the deadlock. I reached for the manual thumb turn on the inside of the lock. I twisted it to the left. It spun loosely in its socket, like a toy steering wheel. There was no resistance, no mechanical clunk of a bolt retracting. It had been disengaged electronically. Panic flared in my chest, hot and sharp. I tapped the keypad on the doorframe. The numbers lit up red. "System lockdown initiated." "System?" I hissed, too loud this time. "Unlock the front door. Emergency override." The voice came from the speaker directly above my head, startling me so bad I almost dropped the knife. "I'm sorry, User 1. Global lockdown is in effect. All exits are sealed until the master code is entered." "Who initiated the lockdown?" I demanded, slamming my hand against the solid wood of the door. The command originated from the master bedroom control panel. My blood ran cold. The person upstairs wasn't just an intruder. They knew how the house worked. They knew I was down here trying to leave, and they had just boxed me in. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the foyer. The windows in the hallway were those narrow, vertical slits, architectural and trendy, but too thin for a human to squeeze through. The only way out was the back wall of glass, but that was laminated safety glass. I'd need a sledgehammer to break it, and the noise would alert whoever was upstairs instantly. Thump. A sound from above. It was heavy, deliberate. The sound of a boot hitting the floorboards. Then another. Thump. Thump. They were walking out of the bedroom. They were heading for the stairs. I looked around frantically for a hiding spot. The open concept design was a nightmare. There were no walls, no corners. The kitchen island was my only option. I scrambled across the living room, sliding behind the massive marble island just as the footsteps hit the top of the stairs. I crouched down, pressing my back against the cold cabinets, pulling my knees to my chest. I held the knife with both hands, the point trembling in the air. The footsteps on the stairs were slow. Creak, step, creak, step. This wasn't someone rushing to attack me. This was someone taking their time, someone confident. I held my breath, listening. The steps reached the bottoms of the stairs. They transitioned from the hollow thud of the wooden steps to the sharp click-clack of hard soles on the concrete floor. They stopped. I squeezed my eyes shut, listening. Were they looking around? Were they listening for me? "System," a voice said. It wasn't the robotic female voice. It was a man's voice, raspy, deep, and sounding like it hadn't been used in days. It sounded wet. "System," the man repeated. "Turn on the kitchen lights, full brightness." I flinched as the overhead LEDs blazed to life instantly, flooding the room with clinical white light. Even behind the island, the sudden brightness was blinding. I was exposed. If you walked around the island, I was cornered. I heard the footsteps start again. They were coming toward the kitchen, toward me. I gripped the knife, preparing to spring up. If you rounded the corner, I'd have to stab him. I'd have no choice. I visualized it, the movement, the impact. I was terrified I wouldn't be able to do it. The footsteps got closer. I could hear the fabric of his pants swooshing. I could smell something now, too, a thick copper scent mixed with old sweat. He stopped right on the other side of the island. He was maybe 3 feet away from me, separated only by the slab of marble. I could hear him breathing, a whistling, congested sound. He set something heavy down on the counter directly above my head. It sounded metallic. Clank. "Come out, Mark," the raspy voice whispered. He knew my name. "I know you're down there. The thermal sensors on the fridge are showing a heat signature right about here." He tapped the marble counter right above my head. Tap, tap, tap. I looked at the stainless steel refrigerator across from me. On its sleek black screen, usually used for grocery lists and family photos, was a thermal map of the kitchen. And there I was, a glowing red blob huddled on the floor, perfectly visible to anyone standing up. For a split second, my brain just rebooted. It refused to process the impossibility of the situation. I was staring at my own heat signature on the fridge, knowing exactly how defenseless I was. He wasn't guessing. He could see me. The tapping on the counter stopped. "Are you going to make this difficult, Mark?" the voice rasped. "I really prefer it when you don't make it difficult." I didn't answer. I didn't think. I just reacted. I exploded upwards from my crouch. I didn't try to attack him. That was a movie move, and I was just a terrified coder. Instead, I grabbed the heavy wooden bowl of decorative lemons sitting on the counter and hurled it blindly over the island in his direction. I heard a grunt of surprise and the clatter of wood hitting the floor. I didn't wait to see if I'd hit him. I bolted. I sprinted toward the only place I could think of, the basement door. The guide said it was storage, do not access,
But it was a heavy door, and if it had a lock, maybe I could buy myself some time. I heard him scramble behind me. He was fast, much faster than his raspy, sick voice suggested. "Get back here," he roared, the wetness in his throat making it sound like a gurgle. I reached the basement door, wrenched it open, and threw myself into the darkness, slamming it shut behind me. I fumbled for a lock. There was a deadbolt. Thank God. I twisted it, hearing the heavy thunk of metal sliding into place just as a body slammed into the other side of the door. The wood shuddered against my back. "Open it!" he screamed, pounding on the door. It sounded like he was using a hammer or something. Hard. The metallic clank I'd heard earlier. Was it a crowbar? A pipe? I backed down the wooden stairs, my flashlight beam shaking wildly. The basement was unfinished, raw concrete walls and exposed insulation. It smelled different down here. Damp, earthy, and metallic? "System," the man's voice yelled from upstairs, muffled by the door. "Unlock basement door." I froze on the bottom step, waiting for the electronic beep that would seal my fate. "Access denied," the robotic voice replied, faint but audible through the floorboards. "Basement access is restricted to admin-level clearance. Guest override not permitted." I slumped against the cold concrete wall, gasping for air. He wasn't an admin. He had access to the master bedroom, but he didn't have full control. That was my first shred of good news. "Fine," the man screamed. Then silence. I waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Then a new sound started. A rhythmic, mechanical whirring from upstairs. It sounded like a drill. No, a saw. An electric saw. He wasn't trying to hack the lock. He was going to cut through the door. I turned away from the stairs, sweeping my flashlight across the basement, looking for a weapon, a window, anything. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating stacks of boxes, old furniture covered in sheets, and I stopped. The beam landed on the far wall. It wasn't a solid concrete wall like the others. It was a partition made of heavy plastic sheeting, taped from floor to ceiling, creating a clean room in the corner. There was a positive pressure vent humming softly, pumping air into it. It looked like a hazardous materials setup, or a kill room. I walked toward it, the sound of the saw grinding into the wood upstairs growing louder. I needed a way out, and maybe there was a window behind that plastic. I found a zippered slit in the sheeting. I pulled it down slowly. The smell hit me instantly. Antiseptic, bleach, and underneath it all, the undeniable stench of decay. I stepped inside. It wasn't a storage room. It was a living space. There was a cot in the corner with dirty blankets, a bucket, a table covered in electronics, monitors, wires, circuit boards, and on the wall, tapped up in a chaotic mosaic, were hundreds of printed photos. I moved closer, my light trembling over the images. They were photos of people, candid shots, people walking in the woods, people sleeping in their beds, people eating dinner. And then I saw the photos in the center. They were photos of me. Me unloading my car. Me standing on the front porch earlier today. Me sitting at the kitchen island an hour ago. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the photos. It was the equipment on the table. There was a laptop open, running a program called Echo Ridge _Smart Home _root. Cables ran from the laptop into a hole in the ceiling, tapping directly into the house's main wiring. This wasn't a squatter. This wasn't a random drifter. This was the admin. The man upstairs wasn't the intruder. He was the squatter. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The Vances didn't have a glitchy smart home. Someone had been living in their basement, hacking their system, watching them, and slowly taking control of their house for months. And when I arrived, I walked right into his web. The sawing upstairs stopped. Then, a massive crack. The basement door had been breached. "Mark," the voice drifted down the stairs, echoing off the concrete. "I know about the room, Mark. I built it." I didn't scream. I think my vocal cords had just paralyzed themselves out of self-preservation. The footsteps on the wooden stairs were heavy, deliberate, and terrifyingly calm. Thump, thump, thump. He wasn't rushing. He knew I was trapped in a concrete box with only one exit, and he was currently blocking it. I looked frantically around the plastic-sheeted kill room. I had seconds before he reached the bottom. I couldn't fight a man who could cut through a solid wood door with a saw. I needed a weapon, or a distraction, or a miracle. My eyes darted to the table with the laptop. The screen was still cascading with lines of code, the heartbeat of the house. I lunged for the table, not to type, but to grab. My hand closed around a heavy metal surge protector strip. It wasn't a gun, but it was a 2-pound brick of hard plastic and copper. It would have to do. I didn't stay by the table. That's where he'd look first. I scrambled toward the back corner of the plastic enclosure, where a stack of black server towers hummed, generating that sickeningly warm air. I wedged myself into the narrow gap between the servers and the plastic sheeting, pulling my knees up, making myself as small as possible. The smell back there was atrocious. The chemical bleach scent was thinner in the corner, overpowered by that other smell, the sweet, cloying stench of rot. I looked down, and my heart hammered against my ribs. Next to the servers was a large blue plastic drum. The lid was sealed with duct tape, but the flies buzzing around the rim told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't just house-sitting. I was visiting a graveyard. The Vances, they probably never made it to Europe. The footsteps hit the concrete floor of the basement. I held my breath, squeezing my eyes shut, listening. The sound of heavy breathing filled the room, that wet, congested wheeze I'd heard upstairs. It was louder now, amplified by the plastic walls. Zzz. The sound of the plastic entry slit being pulled open was deafening. "Mark," the voice rasped, entering the enclosure, "you're making my heart rate monitor spike. The house doesn't like stress." I opened my eyes a fraction. Through the gap in the servers, I could see him. He was a nightmare of contradictions. He was wearing filthy, grease-stained cargo pants and a tattered hoodie that looked like it hadn't been washed in a year. His hair was a matted nest of gray and black, but strapped to his wrist was a pristine, glowing smartwatch. In his hand, he didn't hold a knife or a gun. He held a tablet.
And over his eyes, he wore a pair of night vision goggles, the kind you buy for hunting, strapped tight to his grime-streaked face. He didn't need the lights. "I know you found the laptop," he said, walking casually toward the desk. He ran a dirty finger over the keyboard I had just been looking at. "Beautiful, isn't it? The Vances, they didn't appreciate the architecture. They just wanted the prestige. They didn't understand that a house like this is a living thing. It has a nervous system. It has eyes." He tapped the tablet screen. Somewhere upstairs, I heard the muffled sound of blinds actuating. "I became the brain," he whispered, a smile cracking his dry lips. "I've been living in the walls for 8 months. I eat their food. I watch their TV. I watch them sleep. It was perfect symbiosis. Until you." He turned slowly, the lenses of his goggles whirring softly as they focused. He wasn't looking at the table anymore. He was scanning the room. "You disrupted the ecosystem, Mark. You and your incessant typing, your phone calls. You're a foreign body, a virus." He took a step toward the server rack, toward me. "And you know what the system does to viruses?" I gripped the surge protector so hard my hand cramped. He was 5 feet away, 4 feet. He couldn't see me yet. The heat from the servers must have been masking my thermal signature, confusing his goggles or whatever sensors he was using. He stopped right in front of the blue drum. He rested his hand on the lid, almost affectionately. The Vances were quiet. They didn't scream when I came for them. They were polite. He turned his head sharply. He was looking right at the gap where I was hiding. "But you," he hissed, "you're loud." He lunged.
He didn't pull the servers away, he just smashed his shoulder into the stack, knocking the heavy towers over. They crashed down with a deafening crunch of metal and plastic, exposing me completely. I didn't think. I swung the surge protector with every ounce of terror-fueled adrenaline I had. Crack! The metal power strip connected solidly with the side of his head. It was a sickening sound, like hitting a melon with a hammer. The man howled a high-pitched animalistic shriek and stumbled back, clutching his ear. Blood, dark and thick, instantly started pouring through his fingers. He dropped the tablet. "You little shit!" he screamed, the calm facade shattering instantly. I scrambled up, jumping over the fallen servers. I didn't look back. I sprinted for the slit in the plastic sheeting. "System!" he roared behind me, his voice burgling with rage. "Kill switch! Now!" I burst through the plastic and ran for the stairs, but before I could reach the first step, the basement and the entire world plunged into absolute, total darkness. He had cut the power. I slammed into the wooden banister, disoriented, blinded. The blackness was heavy, pressing against my eyes. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, but behind me, in the plastic room, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. Whirr. The soft electric hum of night vision goggles powering up. "Marco," the voice whispered from the dark, closer than I expected. He could see everything. I could see nothing.
I didn't answer Polo. I didn't breathe. The darkness was suffocating. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was the presence of a predator who lived in it. I knew exactly where the stairs were, 2 steps to my left, but moving meant noise. The basement floor was concrete, which was quiet, but the stairs were wood, old, creaky wood. "You can't hide in my house, Mark," the voice taunted. It was coming from the left side of the plastic room now. He was circling. "I know the floor plan. I know every squeaky board. I know the air currents." He was trying to flush me out. He wanted me to panic and run so he could track the noise. I had to move. If I stayed here, he'd just sweep the room until he touched me. I crouched low, extending a trembling hand until my fingers brushed the cold wood of the bottom step. I took a slow breath, counted to 3, and then I threw the heavy surge protector I was still clutching into the far corner of the basement, away from the stairs. Clang, thud. It hit a metal pipe and clattered to the floor. "There you are," he shouted, and I heard the rush of heavy footsteps charging toward the noise. Now, I vaulted up the stairs. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I took them 3 at a time, my shins smashing into the sharp edges of the wood in the dark, but the adrenaline numbed the pain. I hit the top of the stairs and burst through the ruined door into the kitchen. It was pitch black up here too. The smart home had gone dumb. No ambient lights, no LED clocks on the oven, just the faint, ghostly gray light of the moon filtering through the massive glass wall. And that was the problem. The moonlight illuminated the living room just enough to make silhouettes visible. If I ran across the open floor, I'd be a moving target against the gray glow of the windows. I heard him hit the stairs behind me. He was fast, unnaturally fast for someone who looked so sick. I needed a weapon, a real one, the chef's knife. I'd left it on the living room coffee table. I scrambled on hands and knees across the floor, staying below the level of the kitchen island. I could hear him emerging from the basement. "System won't save you now, Mark. No more lights, no more locks, just us." I reached the coffee table. My hands swept frantically across the surface. Books, a coaster, the laptop. Metal. My fingers closed around the handle of the knife. It felt cold and reassuring. I had a choice. Try for the front door again? No. The electronic deadbolt was fail-safe. Without power, it might remain locked or worse, permanently jammed. The back sliding door. It was glass. If I couldn't open it, I could smash it. I crawled toward the back wall of windows. The moonlight was brighter here. The forest outside was a wall of black pines, swaying in the wind. I reached the sliding door. I pulled the handle. Locked. The manual deadbolt I had engaged earlier was still in place. I reached down to flip the latch.
Click. The sound was tiny, but in the silence of the house it was like a scream. "Found you," the voice whispered. He wasn't behind me. He was above me. I looked up. He was standing on the second-floor balcony, leaning over the glass railing, looking directly down at me. The green glow of his night vision goggles looked like the eyes of a deep-sea monster. He held something in his hand, a large, heavy vase from the hallway table. "Catch!" he grunted. I rolled to the right just as the vase plummeted. Crash! It smashed into the floor exactly where I had been crouching a second ago, exploding into ceramic shrapnel. A shard sliced across my cheek, hot and stinging, but I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet. He was coming down the stairs now. I could hear his boots thundering. I couldn't get the door open in time. The secondary footlock was still engaged at the bottom. I needed to break the glass. I looked around for something heavy. A chair. The dining chairs were heavy steel and leather. I grabbed one, swung it back with a primal scream, and smashed it into the massive pane of glass. Thud. The glass didn't break. It didn't even crack. It just shuddered. Impact-resistant. Hurricane-proof. Of course, the Vances had built a fortress. "You can't break the shell, Mark." The admin was laughing now, a wet, manic sound coming from the living room. "It's triple-paned laminate. You're inside the jar." I was trapped. The front door was electronically sealed. The back wall was unbreakable. The basement was his lair. I backed up against the cold glass, raising the knife. He emerged from the shadows of the kitchen, the green lenses of his night vision goggles, and the blood still dripping down the side of his face. He held a crowbar now. "Put the knife down," he said, walking slowly toward me. "Let's make this clean, like the Vances." I looked at him, then I looked past him toward the only other exit in the room, the fireplace. It was a massive modern gas fireplace set into a stone pillar in the center of the room. It was wide, open, and vented up through the roof. But wait. The smart home panel on the wall near me flickered, the battery backup. The screen lit up with a single red warning message. "Error. Gas leak detected. Ventilation failure." I stared at the screen. Then I looked at the admin. He hadn't seen it. He was too focused on me. He had cut the power, which killed the ventilation fans. But if the gas pilot light was out and the valves were electronic... I sniffed the air. Underneath the smell of fear and ozone, there was a faint, rotten egg smell. Gas. The room was filling with gas, and he was holding a crowbar, one spark. "I said," he growled, raising the crowbar, "put the knife down." I lowered the knife slowly. "Okay," I said, my voice shaking. "Okay, you win. Just, can I turn on the lights? I don't want to die in the dark." He paused, confused. "There is no power, you idiot." "The backup," I lied. "The emergency generator. I saw the panel flicker. Just let me check the panel." I took a step toward the wall panel, away from him. He chuckled. "Go ahead. Try. It won't work." I reached the panel. I didn't try to turn on the lights. I tapped the fireplace icon. The system let out a low beep. Ignition sequence initiated. I dove behind the heavy leather sofa just as the piezoelectric spark clicked. Click.
The sound wasn't a boom, it was a whoosh, a deep, vacuum-like intake of breath that sucked the air right out of the room, followed instantly by a concussive roar. The pocket of gas that had pooled near the fireplace ignited instantly. The blast wave hit the leather sofa I was hiding behind like a physical hammer, shoving the heavy furniture a foot across the floor and slamming it into my ribs. Heat, intense and searing, washed over me. I curled into a ball, covering my head as the sound of shattering glass finally filled the house. Not the hurricane-proof windows, those held. It was the interior glass, vases, cabinet doors, the light fixtures. They exploded in a symphony of destruction. Then came the scream. It wasn't human. It was the sound of raw, confused agony. "No! My house! My house!"
I peered over the top of the sofa, blinking through the smoke and the sudden dancing orange light. The living room was a scene from hell. The curtains were ablaze, the rug was burning. The blast hadn't been enough to level the house, but it had turned the sleek, modern living room into a firebox. The admin was on the floor near the kitchen island. He wasn't dead. He was rolling, batting at his sleeve, which had caught fire. His night vision goggles were gone, knocked off by the blast, skittering somewhere across the floor. He was blind again, but this time there was light. I coughed, the acrid smoke stinging my throat. I had to go. The fire was spreading fast, eating the expensive fabric and dry wood with terrifying speed. The smoke would kill me before the flames did if I didn't get out. I looked at the back wall of glass. The explosion hadn't shattered it, but the pressure had done something else. The massive steel frame of the sliding door had warped. The top corner was buckled outward, leaving a gap. I scrambled up, clutching my bruised ribs. The knife was gone, lost in the chaos. I didn't need it. I just needed to run. I bolted for the door. The admin heard me. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the flames licking at the curtains behind him. His face was a mask of soot and blood, his eyes wild and unfocused in the bright firelight. "You don't leave! You don't get to leave!" He charged. He didn't have his crowbar anymore, but he didn't need it. He was fueled by a manic, possessive rage. I reached the door and jammed my fingers into the buckled gap in the frame. The metal was hot. I pulled, straining with everything I had. Screech! The warped metal groaned, sliding open about 6 inches. Not enough. I heard him getting closer. I didn't look back. I braced my foot against the glass and pulled again, screaming with the effort. Screech! Clang! It opened another foot, wide enough. I dove through the gap, tumbling out onto the cold wooden deck. The freezing night air hit my face like a slap, shocking and wonderful. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I vaulted over the deck railing, dropping 5 feet onto the gravel below. I hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact, and kept running. I didn't head for the driveway. The driveway was long, winding, and open. If he had a gun, or if he just ran faster, he'd catch me. I ran into the woods. I plunged into the dense pine forest, the branches whipping my face, the undergrowth tearing at my clothes. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Only then did I stop and look back. The house on the hill was glowing. It was a terrifyingly beautiful sight. The glass box was filled with orange light, flickering and pulsing. It looked like a lantern in the darkness. Smoke was pouring from the roof vents, disappearing into the night sky. I watched, panting, waiting to see a figure run out, waiting for the police sirens, waiting for anything. But no one ran out. I squinted. Inside the glowing glass box, I could see a silhouette. He was standing in the living room. He wasn't trying to escape. He wasn't running for the door. He was standing in front of the wall of glass, looking out into the dark woods, looking toward me. He raised a hand and placed it against the glass. He was staying. I turned and ran. I didn't stop running until I hit the county road 3 miles away. I flagged down a logging truck at 2 a.m., looking like a maniac, bleeding, soot-covered, and smelling of smoke. The driver didn't ask questions. He just drove. The next 4 hours were a blur of fluorescent lights, bitter coffee, and the smell of my own smoke-drenched clothes. I was sitting in an interrogation room at the county sheriff's station. I wasn't in handcuffs, but I wasn't exactly free to leave either. I had just admitted to blowing up a multi-million-dollar property. The 2 deputies who picked me up from the logging truck were treating me with a mix of suspicion and pity. I looked like a maniac, blood drying on my cheek, shirt torn, reeking of gas and burnt plastic. "Walk us through it one more time," Detective Miller said. He was a heavy-set guy with tired eyes. He didn't believe me. I could hear it in his voice. To him, this sounded like a drug-fueled breakdown or a burglary gone wrong. "I told you," I croaked, my throat raw from the smoke. "There was a man in the house. He was living in the basement. He killed the Vances. He was going to kill me." Miller sighed, tapping his pen on the metal table. "Right, the man in the wall. And this man, he hacked the house?" "He was the house," I said, putting my head in my hands. "Just check the basement. If there's anything left of it, check the blue drums." They exchanged a look with their partner. They thought I was hallucinating. They left me alone in the room for what felt like an eternity. I stared at the one-way mirror, watching my own reflection. It triggered a panic attack. I had to look away. I couldn't look at glass anymore. Every time I did, I expected to see that smudge, the handprint, or the glowing green eyes of the goggles. Around 6 a.m., the door opened. It wasn't Miller. It was the sheriff. He looked pale. Actually, he looked green. He was holding a plastic bag containing my wallet and phone. He sat down opposite me and slid the bag across the table. He didn't look skeptical anymore. He looked horrified. "You can go, son," he said, quietly. I blinked. "What?" "Fire crews got the blaze under control about an hour ago," he said, his voice tight. "The structure is a total loss, but the foundation is concrete." He took a deep breath, like he was trying to steady his stomach. "They found the basement. They found the plastic room. And they found the drums." I closed my eyes, letting out a shuddering breath. I wasn't crazy. It was real. "We identified the homeowners. Dental records will confirm, but it's them, the Vances. Been down there a while." "And the man? The guy in the goggles?"
"We found a body in the living room," the sheriff nodded. "Badly burned, but we found him. He was found near the rear window. It looks like he was just standing there when the roof came down." "Do you know who he was?" The sheriff pulled a file folder from under his arm. He opened it and slid a printed mugshot across the table. It was an older photo, clean-shaven, wearing a suit, but the eyes were the same, intense, predatory. "Elias Thorne," the sheriff said. "Recognize the name?" I shook my head. "He was the lead systems architect for Sentient Home Solutions, the company that built the automation system for the Vance estate. He was fired 2 years ago for unethical data harvesting. He went off the grid shortly after. Everyone thought he moved overseas." "He didn't move," I whispered. "He just moved in." "It fits," the sheriff said, rubbing his temples. "He knew the codes, he knew the wiring, he built the damn thing." I felt a wave of relief so strong it almost made me dizzy. It was over. The monster was dead. He was just a disgruntled, insane engineer who got obsessed with his creation. He was a flesh and blood man, and he died like one. "So, I can go?" I asked, standing up. "Yeah," the sheriff said. "We'll need a formal statement later, but for now, go home. Get some sleep." I walked to the door, my hand on the knob. "One more thing," the sheriff said. I stopped. The tone of his voice had changed. It wasn't comforting anymore. It was puzzled, troubled. "The basement, the area where he had his computer set up, it was shielded. Halon system. The fire didn't touch the server rack." My stomach tightened. "Okay?" "Our tech guys pulled the logs," the sheriff said, "just to see what he was doing down there. We thought maybe he was stealing credit card numbers or identity theft." He hesitated. "Mark, at 2:14 a.m., about 30 seconds before the explosion, the system initiated a data transfer." "A transfer? Transfer to where?" "We don't know," the sheriff admitted. "It was an encrypted upload, massive file size, video feeds, audio logs, thermal data, everything the house recorded for the last 6 months." I felt the blood drain from my face. "He uploaded it?" "He didn't just upload it," the sheriff said, looking down at the file. "He live-streamed it.
The logs show a connection to a private server with a singular IP address. The connection had been active since you walked in the front door 3 days ago. The room seemed to tilt. "Someone was watching?" I whispered. "We don't know if it was a person, a storage cloud, or a website," the sheriff said grimly. "But that upload completed 5 seconds before the system went offline. Whoever or whatever was on the other end, they have everything. They saw you, they saw him, they saw the whole thing." I walked out of the station into the gray morning light, but I didn't feel free. Elias Thorne was dead. The Vances were dead. The house was a pile of ash. But somewhere, on a screen I couldn't see, someone had just watched the season finale, and they knew exactly who I was. It's been 90 days since the fire. 3 months. That's usually the milestone where therapists say the acute trauma phase is supposed to end and integration begins. Integration. That's a funny word for it. I don't live in a glass house anymore. I live in a basement apartment in the city. It's a damp, windowless concrete box that smells like mildew and old takeout, and I love it. It has 1 door with 3 deadbolts. I don't have Alexa, I don't have Siri, I don't have a smart TV. I have a flip phone I bought at a gas station with cash, and I put tape over the lens of the one laptop I use for work. I thought if I went analog, I'd be safe. I thought if I removed the eyes, I wouldn't be seen. But the sheriff's words kept rotting in the back of my brain like the bodies in those blue drums. A data transfer, a massive upload. I tried to tell myself it was just Thorne backing up his sick trophy collection to a cloud server, just a crazy man saving his work. But deep down, I knew the timing didn't make sense. You don't start an upload 3 days before a fire unless you know the fire is coming, or unless the show is ending. I was working a temp job doing data entry for a logistics company, mindless work, safe work, when the email came through. It hit my work inbox at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. The spam filter should have caught it, but it didn't. It sat there, glaring at me in bold text among a sea of shipping manifests. Subject, Performance Review User 1. From admin_root_archive. My hands went numb. The office noise, the hum of the copier, the chatter of coworkers faded into a buzzing static. I should have called the police. I should have called Detective Miller. I should have deleted it and smashed the computer. But I didn't. I clicked it. It's that same broken instinct that makes you stare at a car crash. You have to know. There was no text in the body of the email, just a link. A URL consisting of a random string of numbers and letters ending in .onion, the dark web. I didn't click the link, I wasn't stupid, but I hovered over it and the preview image loaded in the cache. It was a thumbnail. It was a picture of me, but it wasn't from the house. It was a picture of me buying coffee yesterday. I was wearing my gray hoodie, looking over my shoulder, a nervous tic I've developed. The angle was high, taken from across the street. Maybe a traffic camera? A security camera from the bank opposite the coffee shop? I felt the bile rise in my throat. I stood up, knocking my chair over. "Mark, you okay?" the woman in the next cubicle asked, looking concerned. I have to go," I stammered. I grabbed my bag and ran. I didn't even log off. I sprinted out of the building into the bright, crowded city street. I expected to feel safe in the crowd, but instead I felt naked. Every lens I passed felt like a gun barrel. The CCTV camera on the corner, the dash cam in the Uber idling at the curb, the smartphone raised by a teenager taking a selfie. The fishbowl effect. I realized then that I hadn't escaped the glass house. I had just moved into a bigger one. I made it to my apartment, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I dropped them twice. I slammed the door, locked all 3 deadbolts, and slid the heavy dresser in front of the frame. I sat in the dark, my back against the dresser, clutching a kitchen knife. I waited. Hours passed. The silence of the basement apartment was usually comforting, but now it felt heavy, pregnant. Then, my flip phone buzzed. I stared at it. It was sitting on the floor, vibrating against the linoleum. It was a burner. Nobody had the number except my boss and the pizza place. I picked it up. Unknown number. I flipped it open. Hello? Silence. Then, a sound. It was a recording. I recognized the audio immediately. It was the sound of the gas fireplace igniting, the click, whoosh, roar. Then a voice. It wasn't the robotic female voice of the house, and it wasn't Thorne's raspy, sick voice. This voice was digital, synthesized, deep, and distorted. Season 1 was excellent, Mark. The ratings were unprecedented. "Who is this?" I screamed. "Thorne is dead!" Thorne was a talented set designer, but he was difficult. He got too involved with the cast. We had to cancel his contract. That's why we authorized the gas leak. My blood turned to ice. You killed him?" "We liquidated the asset," the voice corrected, "and we cleared the stage. But the audience loves a survivor arc." "Leave me alone," I yelled, tears streaming down my face. "I'm not part of your sick game." "You don't understand, User 1, the voice said, sounding almost amused. "You aren't a player anymore. You're the franchise." The line went dead. I sat there in the dark, the phone in my hand, and then I heard it. A faint, high-pitched whine. It was coming from the corner of the room, from the smoke detector, the cheap plastic smoke detector that came with the apartment. I looked up. A tiny red LED was pulsing. Not the slow blink of a battery check. A rapid, rhythmic pulse. Recording. I grabbed the chair and smashed the detector off the ceiling. It shattered, and a small black component skittered across the floor. A Wi-Fi transmitter. I wasn't in a safe house. I had moved exactly where they wanted me to move. Thorne hadn't been the only one watching. He was just the local admin. The real owners, the people paying for the feed, the people who authorized the gas leak, they were still out there. And they had just renewed me for Season 2.
I didn't pack a bag. Packing implies you have a destination, and I knew right then that I didn't have one. I had a head start, and that was it. I grabbed a wad of cash from my sock drawer, my run fund, and walked out the door. I left the burner phone on the floor, still open, the line dead, but the threat hanging heavy in the air. I left the laptop. I left my clothes. I walked out of that apartment building and didn't look back. I didn't take an Uber. I didn't take the subway. I walked 4 miles to a used car lot in the bad part of town, paid $3,000 cash for a rusted-out 2005 sedan with no GPS, no Bluetooth, and a tape deck. I drove until the city skyline was a smudge in the rearview mirror, and then I kept driving until the road signs stopped having numbers and started having names like Deadwood Pass and Granite Ridge. I was running from the eyes. That was the only logic I had left. The sheriff had said the signal came from a singular IP address. The voice on the phone said I was a franchise. That meant money. That meant resources. It meant that as long as I was within reach of a cell tower or a Wi-Fi signal, I was on stage. So I went where the signal died. I ended up in a hunting cabin in the northern strip of Idaho, miles past the last power line. It was a rotting shell of a place. No electricity, no running water, just a wood stove and a roof that mostly kept the snow out. I grew a beard. I lost 20 pounds. I chopped wood until my hands were nothing but callus and scar tissue. For 6 months, I lived like an animal, and for 6 months, I was free. The silence out there was different than the silence in the glass house.
In the house, the silence felt expectant, like an audience holding its breath. In the woods, the silence was indifferent. The trees didn't care if I lived or died. The wind didn't want to know my heart rate. I started to sleep again. The nightmares of the admin and his green goggles faded, replaced by the simple, brutal reality of survival. I convinced myself that I had won. I had canceled the show. I had walked off the set. But trauma is a patient hunter. It was late October when the snow started to stick. I was out checking the perimeter, old habits die hard, looking for deer tracks. I was about a mile from the cabin, deep in a grove of ancient pines. I saw a flash of color against the gray and white of the forest floor. It was bright orange, unnatural. I walked over to it, my boots crunching on the frozen crust of snow. It was a dead fox, but it hadn't been killed by a wolf or a bear. It was perfectly intact, lying on its side. I nudged it with my boot. It was stiff, frozen solid. But then I saw the collar. A thin, black plastic collar was cinched tight around its neck. It looked like a tracking collar, the kind wildlife researchers use. I knelt down, brushing the snow away to get a better look.
There was a small metal tag riveted to the plastic. I expected to see a university name or the Department of Fish and Game. I wiped the frost off the metal. It read, Prop Dept, Asset Number 409. The breath seized in my lungs. The world tilted on its axis. Prop Department. I scrambled backward, crab-walking through the snow, my eyes darting to the trees, the indifferent trees. I looked up, high up, about 30 feet off the ground, tucked into the crook of a massive branch, was a gray spherical object. It blended perfectly with the bark. If you weren't looking for it, you'd never see it. A solar-powered lens. I looked at the tree next to it. Another one. I spun around, scanning the forest. I started to see them everywhere. Tiny, camouflaged blisters on the trunks, microphones disguised as lichen, motion sensors painted to look like knots in the wood. I wasn't in the wild. I was in an enclosure. I turned and ran back toward the cabin, screaming, the primal, guttural scream of a man who realizes he never actually woke up from the nightmare. I burst through the door of my cabin, grabbing the axe I kept by the stove. I started hacking at the walls. I swung with wild, manic desperation. Wood chips flew as I tore into the logs I thought had been keeping me safe. Thunk. The axe head hit something hard inside the log. Not wood, metal. I pried the splintered wood away, embedded deep inside the timber, drilled in from the outside and plugged with a wood filler cap, was a high-definition fiber-optic camera. It was pointing right at my bed. I dropped the axe. I fell to my knees in the center of the room. They hadn't found me. They had placed me. The rusted car I bought? Planted. The road I took? Guided. The abandoned cabin? Built. Everything, the isolation, the struggle, the survival, it was just a genre shift. Season 1 was techno-horror. Season 2 was wilderness survival. A high-pitched beep cut through the air. It wasn't a smoke detector this time. It was coming from under the floorboards. Click. A speaker I hadn't known was there crackled to life. The audio quality was crystal clear, filling the small, cold room. It was the synthesized voice. And that's a wrap on Season 2. The voice boomed, echoing off the hollow walls. Incredible performance, Mark. The despair felt truly authentic. I stared at the camera in the wall. I didn't have the energy to smash it. I didn't have the energy to run. Don't worry, the voice continued, smooth and terrifyingly cheerful. You're going to love the city setting. The chase sequences are going to be spectacular. Outside, in the distance,
I heard the heavy thrum of a helicopter rotor blade cutting through the silence of the valley. They were coming to move the set. I looked into the lens of the camera buried in the wall, and for the first time, I didn't see a machine. I saw the millions of invisible eyes behind it. I smiled. It was a broken, jagged smile. I whispered, "Make sure you get my good side." Because there is no off switch. There is no exit. The world is just a series of glass houses, and I am the only one who knows the walls are there.